anything that we can. So, things like our Quick Start program, getting patients on drug right away when it's prescribed, um, having excellent support, co-payment assistance, all of that to make it as easy as possible. So a big part of that too is having a one-to-one relationship with patients between our hub, our specialty pharmacy and patients. So they're always talking to the same person. So we anticipated this early part of the year transition period. So they identified everyone who would have a reauthorization, and the team does everything possible to then reach out to the doctor's offices, the patients, make sure they have all the information ready to get through those reauthorizations. And then for patients who, where the reauthorization sometimes takes, a period of weeks, we want to make sure there's absolute continuity of care. So some of those patients will go back to free product temporarily while we're helping them through the reauthorization. So basically, the bottom line is we don't want patients to feel any of this. And we think that that's something that's starting to differentiate us in the marketplace.
That's helpful. At the exiting last year, I believe, and I could have the data points wrong, that maybe a third or just less than a third were still receiving free drug. As we go into this year, as coverage is improved, I would imagine the pacing of that more to pay is going to continue. But can you give us some sense of how that is moving?
Yeah, throughout all of last year, it just kept getting better and better. And to your point, we did have about a third on free product. We got the last major PBM contract signed, and it went active at the start of this year. So what that means is the average, about 80% of the HAE patients will have access to coverage for ORLADEYO. So the average patient coming in will get to free product now within a month, or sorry, to paid product, excuse me, within a month. And we expect that 80% number, as we move into the first half of this year to be the percentage who are on paid versus free. So free should go from about a third and start to approach 20% as we go through the course of this year.
Okay, and one of the aspects of any launch, obviously, we see the clinical data, and then we wait to see, as it's set into the wild, how it performs, and we're always worried about the funnel out and retention rates. Obviously, we're always focusing on the funnel in, but boy, that funnel out can be pretty difficult. You all have done a great job. The retention rates seem high, and obviously that goes to the drug itself, but I would imagine it goes to the ability of the company in terms of interactions with the patients and the clinicians. Can you just talk about the retention rates you're experiencing, any surprises, best practices as you try to continue to improve that over the year?
Yeah, so we're really pleased with the retention that we've seen because it's a great drug, and so most we would expect most patients to do well. Not every patient, but most patients are going to do well. So last year, 70% of the patients who started ORLADEYO stayed on, and best practices there are to really set expectations for those first few months. We want to make sure that patients give this drug. Anytime they switch drugs, that can be a period of some nervousness and wondering how they're going to do. So we set expectations around the long-term efficacy that can be expected, as well as any side effects that might happen, like the GI side effects that, if they do happen, tend to go away early in therapy. So if patients know that up front, if they've heard that from their healthcare provider, they hear it from our care coordinators at Empower Patient Services, that really helps them feel more comfortable in those early months. If we can get them through the first few months, we expect that the patients who are going to do really well are going to stay on the drug for the long term.
And that translates obviously to better pricing. I don't know if you want to comment a little bit about the implications in terms of the retention and pricing, and maybe the delta between last year and this year, which I think we could probably calculate, but anything you want to say to that?
So in terms of pricing overall, I think ORLADEYO is the least expensive prophy product, but we try to keep the pricing, make sure for the patients that they don't feel any aspect of that pricing. So wherever we can, we help them with the co-payment assistance. And then overall pricing, are you asking about the gross to net there,
Yeah,
Ken?
just the improvements as you have more paid drug through the course of the year, which is probably a bit of an obvious, but love to hear you just comment on it.
Yeah, so maybe I'll turn that one. Anthony's got a good answer for that one.
No, and Ken, I think when we started, we were clear that based on our intent to have a successful quick start program, and Charlie's talked at length about that, the gross to net was highest, in the early stages of our launch. It continues to get better as our base increases, as we continue to get PBMs and insurers online, and as we continue to see an improvement in the pace of getting patients onto reimbursement. So, by the time we get to peak here in the US, we should be at about 15 to 20%. And we'll see continuous improvement from now till then.
Okay, great. The other component is obviously the patient population. And at the end of this brief discussion, before we go to the pipeline, I'll try to throw some patient figures at you all and just get a perspective on the market to put some parameters around maybe what even a 750 to a billion looks like. But obviously you're taking new patient starts. You're trying to take from the on-demand patients that are out there and then switches. And I'll tell you, we had Takeda on, which by the way, they are some of the nicest folks we deal with. I hope they're nice in the marketplace. They were very thoughtful and kind as they spoke about the implications of your launch. Obviously, they have a great drug as well. So I just want you to know that the way they framed it was very kind. But can you just talk about these three components? How much kind of churn is there with the switching? It seems like switching would be the largest potential component for you all. But can you talk about those three, the naive, the on-demand, and then switching, how we should see the continued evolution here?
Yeah. Charlie, let me start and then you can jump in. So again, kind of patting Charlie on the back and his team, and then Jinky Roselli and the work that she did on some of the data analytics, long before we launched. We just got really smart around what's in the heads of doctors and patients in terms of switching, right? And what created a good switch, what created a bad switch where patients went back, so that we could be as smart as we can to be able to educate doctors and our hub services help patients as they navigate the switch. And I think we weren't surprised by this, but I think others in the marketplace were, which is people controlled on injectable prophy switching to Orladeyo is the number one source of scripts, right, of patients. And Takhzyro is the number one of the prophy injectables that we're getting patients from. And so, I think we did a fantastic job, and it shouldn't be surprising, because if you can be controlled on one capsule once a day, it's not some little incremental convenience improvement over a twice a week injection. You're not looking at the medicine in the refrigerator reminding you you're sick. You're not sticking yourself every 2 weeks reminding you you're sick. You don't have to plan how you're going to bring your refrigerated medicine on your vacation reminding you you're sick. You're taking it with your daily vitamin. And we've heard from patients say they forget they're sick on Orladeyo. So that's mind-blowing for these patients. And I'll let Charlie address the other two populations.
Yeah, so from the standpoint of the acute only patients and then the naive patients, Ken, you've heard us talk about the fact that there's 7,500 patients in diagnosed and treated patients in the US market. Increasingly, that's people on prophylaxis. So those other segments are smaller and getting smaller. There are always going to be a few new patients being diagnosed, and for those patients who are appropriate for prophy, Orladeyo is a natural place to start. But the big opportunities for us going forward are switching from other prophy, then acute only, and a small bit on the naive. And long term, as we talk about $1 billion in peak sales, up to about 800 million in the US, we don't need all the patients. We only need about 2,000 patients in the market to get there, which would be 25 to 30% of that 7,500. So this isn't a winner take all market. For us, it's about finding the patients who would most prefer to prevent attacks by taking an oral once daily medicine. And we think that Orladeyo could be the market leader because there are many of those patients out there.
That makes a lot of sense, and you framed it for us at the 25 to 30% as we do our analysis. Absolutely right, and I think that would mean that there's roughly probably, and we're guessing here, but around 8% penetration just to even have where you are with the ability that you captured patients and retaining. It doesn't even seem you have to keep the same pace that you just got to easily hit the 250 million. So I just wanted to put that out to folks. Even if there's a slowing patient accumulation, you're well on your way already to that number. With kind of that backdrop from a clinician penetration perspective, can you give us a sense of where we are in terms of the target prescriber? Are we seeing 3/4 prescribe? Are we seeing 50%? Can you give us a sense of where that is and where you are in the process?
Charlie, can you take that? No, go ahead, Charlie.
Oh, yeah. So, I think actually this is a really good news story, Ken. We've talked about there are about 500 doctors that treat 50% of the USHE marketplace. At this point, about 50% of them have tried Orladeyo with at least one patient. So we think that's really good penetration at this point, but also the fact that 50% haven't, but we've reached nearly all of them. As we do our market research, even those non-prescribers expect to prescribe Orladeyo in the future. So the good news is we have a lot of room to grow, both in breadth of prescribing, just in that top tier, and then depth, repeat prescribing amongst them. And then we have many other kind of tier 2 prescribers who still have a small handful of patients, and we're reaching them as well. Our team is sized for it. They're motivated. They're out there reaching all the potential prescribers. So we have a lot of growth opportunity, and that's what gives us confidence in the no less than 250 this year and the billion long term.
No, makes sense.
Hey, Ken, one other thing that Charlie and I and Helen were at Quad AI, the big allergy academy meeting in Phoenix 2 weekends ago. And, we had our booth, and something that was really interesting is one of the main panels in the booth had this, 1,000 across the top of it. And it was 1,000 patients have been prescribed Orladeyo. And to listen to docs walk up and see that, they're like, oh, I didn't realize that. And so these are the little things that you get when you meet with docs face to face, and it was almost like a peer pressure thing, right? That I didn't realize that. So it's little things like that are we have a lot of confidence are going to be really helpful over the course of the year.
Yeah, I think as we sit on our side of the fence, we don't appreciate the socializing of a drug and clinicians being able to interact with each other. And I know that COVID kind of prevented a little bit of that. And as folks get more and more comfortable even communicating with each other, I know that always helps. So just lastly, before we turn over to the pipeline, the international opportunity, we feel so good about the numbers and where they could go in the U.S. I don't know if you just want to give us a perspective of the European launch and talk through, the ex-US contribution.
Charlie, you want to take Europe and I'll take Japan?
Sure. What I'll say is we're excited about the entire global opportunity. It's going to take longer to show up meaningfully. And, at peak, we expect to get to 200 million of that billion coming from Europe and other regions. So in Europe, we've built out most of our team. We've launched in Germany, France, UK, Sweden, Norway at this point. We're in various stages of market access in other markets. And Europe is really about growing the prophylaxis market more. It had been slower use of prophylaxis in the past. The options just weren't there, but that's really starting to change. A lot of enthusiasm, and as you can imagine, the drug that we have is going to fit really well in there. So it's Europe is more of a volume game. It's going to take 2 to 3 European patients to add up to the value of one US patient. But our team is, we've got a great team in Europe. They're fired up, and in the coming years, you'll see that starting to make more of an impact in our sales.
And Charlie's team's done distributorships and other types of arrangements in places like the Middle East, and we'll continue to explore those. And then we've got the license agreement with Torii as our partner in Japan, and that's a completely different market. As we talked about in the past, about 700 patients have been identified. When you would apply the prevalence calculation to the population, it should be more like 2,500 to 3,000. So it's a find the patient. So that's going to take longer as well. I'll throw a compliment back to Takeda. They're about to get approval, and we expect that they'll launch when they get their pricing approved sometime over the course of the year. And having another company with another drug to help find patients is good overall for everybody, and I think most importantly for patients. So we expect that market will mature over time.
Okay, great. Why don't I turn it over to Stacy?
Thanks for the time. So for PNH, Helen, can you set the stage for 9930? Remind us the proof of concept results we've seen so far, and importantly, maybe comment on the durability of the efficacy we've been seeing since we first got the results.
Helen, you want to take that?
Sure. Thanks, Stacy, for the question. We are very pleased, I think, with where we are with the program, the Factor D inhibitor program in PNH. We've seen in our proof of concept study, we've seen clear evidence of increase in hemoglobin with Factor D inhibition in patients who have previously been on C5 inhibitors and those who have not. And so in a very small population, we've been able to demonstrate proof of concept for the ability to improve hemoglobin, to raise hemoglobin by a number of grams per deciliter, and demonstrate proof of concept there with near normalization of hemoglobin and control of anemia. In that, we've also seen a reduction in transfusions required as patients' anemia corrects. We've seen freedom from transfusions in the patients who were naive to prior therapy, and we've seen near freedom from transfusions in the patients on previous C5 inhibitors and transfusion dependent coming into the trial. With both of those, we've also had an improvement in the FACIT-Fatigue scores, which is a patient-reported and validated score for a level of fatigue, how patients feeling as a result of anemia. And so as you see anemia improve, hemoglobin come up, you'd expect that to improve, and we saw that. All of that we saw in a very small patient population with sufficient strength of the signal that it allows us to go straight from there to a pivotal program. It is that pivotal program now that's underway. We have 2 trials, one in each of those populations, both controlled trials, and it's running. They're both enrolling and running globally. One more thing I'd like to point out is that with this pivotal program, with the 2 controlled trials, we have the opportunity to achieve robust controlled data set, including patient-reported outcomes in both groups. One thing that we're doing that has not been done elsewhere is getting that controlled data set in the treatment-naive population as well, which gives us in total a data set that is generalizable if the studies are successful, and supports registration globally, not only around the endpoint, but also around patient-reported outcomes and the ability to get to access globally with this trial program. So we're very, very pleased with where it is.
And durability, Helen, we've had what, at least up to a year, and in some patients up to 2 years?
Yeah, we've treated for well over a year in most of those patients, and up to 2, yes. And we're seeing durability of that response. So we've gotten to monotherapy in patients and durable not only near normalizing hemoglobin, but maintaining that rate for an extended period of time. So that evidence is additionally gives us confidence in the pivotal trial program.
Could we follow up on some of the phase 3 designs for PNH? You mentioned C5 naive and also those that are inadequately responding. So can you walk through the nuances of the 2 different trial designs and the different endpoints?
Sure. Well, they have, bottom line, they have a number of similarities, which is maybe where I go to highlight what would be the differences. And the similarity is monotherapy. And monotherapy with 9930 as a Factor D inhibitor in a randomized setting. The similarity is that change from baseline in hemoglobin is the primary endpoint in both of those populations. And we are expecting to see, based on the proof of concept data, an improvement in hemoglobin in both of those populations. And so that's above the standard therapy C5 inhibitors and for the patients who are treatment naive. We're expecting to see also an improvement in transfusion rates and the targeted freedom from transfusions. So that's a key secondary endpoint in both trials. And we're expecting to see also that improvement in how patients feel, the relief from fatigue, the ability to go on with life as usual, and return to what was their pre-PNH baseline. And that's being assessed in the patient-reported outcomes in a controlled fashion in both trials. The difference is that in the treatment-naive population, with a placebo control, we'll be measuring the primary endpoint at 12 weeks. In the treatment exposed population with inadequate response, we'll be measuring that endpoint at a series of measurements out to 24 weeks. So that's, I think, the primary difference between the two trials.
And our confidence is incredibly high, Stacy, in terms of the outcome, because we took the data from the 6 patients that were poor responders or inadequate responders to C5 and the 9 patients that were naive, and we ran them through the time periods and the endpoints for the pivotal study, and we got great results. And so with small sample sizes, obviously we're powering it much higher in a pivotal study, but it gives us a lot of confidence the drug will work in a pivotal study.
Got it. And understanding we're still really early in the enrollment, can you set expectations? 2 different types of patient populations. So are you willing to comment at all on additional details for enrollment in PNH, or maybe in the context of Omicron?
I'll take the start and you can take the finish on this one. That if we gave you an estimate, we'd be wrong. And so we don't want to misguide you, but Helen will talk to you about the backstop.
Yeah, bottom line, I'm very pleased. We've had tremendous interest in both trials. That interest is global, including in the US and Europe. So we're seeing sites come into the study, start screening, and we're seeing enrollment pick up, just as you'd expect to. So bottom line, going well. In terms of being able to predict what happens from here, one thing we can predict is where we'll be at the end of 2023, and there are a number of things that play into that. So that's the guidance that we're giving, is towards the end of 2023, we will have completed enrollment in the trials, we will have top-line data for both trials, and we will be preparing the submissions for registration for PNH. And I would mention here, in addition to that, we have, and this is the lead indication for 9930, and it's one that clearly is in pivotal program, and we anticipate that timing for getting to preparation for submission for registration. In addition, this is a program that has a great deal more potential. So the renal basket study is an example of that. We are already now in proof of concept enrolling in the ReNeu study in 3 additional indications where the alternative pathway is definitely a crucial part of the disease, and therefore targeting it with an oral therapy is a very reasonable approach to meet an unmet need in that disease. Those 3 indications each will enroll and will move to proof of concept. We will have proof of concept and starting up pivotal programs for those also in this same time frame. And you can expect us to see us going into additional diseases with 9930 in the same time frame. So there's a lot happening, more than PNH alone, with this drug in that time frame.
Can you help guide the type of expectations or endpoints that you all are looking for? I know 3 different indications for the renal basket trial, but just in general, proteinuria, are we looking for biopsy improvements? Any additional details around the basket trial would be really helpful.
So we're looking for proteinuria as the primary outcome. We're also, as you normally would do in a proof of concept, looking at everything. And so proteinuria is a very important measure. It's also one that's appropriate for registration in these diseases. And so that is the primary that we're assessing in the proof of concept program. But we also are looking at biomarkers of mechanism of action and of drug. We're looking at eGFR as the long-term outcome, which is always the goal for these patients. And we'll be looking at a number of other things. So it'll be the totality of that data set that guides us in confirming when we achieve proof of concept.
Okay. And in terms of timing, can you set expectations? Would we get maybe earlier 3-month data, 6-month data? How should we be thinking about kind of the release of results over time?
Yeah, so one of the benefits of an open label trial is that we will be assessing the data as patients are proceeding through the study. And we'll have the opportunity also to assess for proof of concept as patients proceed through the study. We've designed the trial so we have up to 14 patients potential in each cohort, and we have up to 24 weeks to assess for that proteinuria endpoint as well as the other ones we're collecting. When we'll achieve proof of concept for each disease, we're not able to predict at this point, but it could be earlier than that as we see the data and the patients accrue.
Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, I know we're bumping up against time, and I guess I'll just end it with, and it will be a statement, kind of a question, but clearly you're proving yourself in the commercial setting, and this pipeline, undoubtedly, just looking at Novartis's program, is going after large pharma type indications, large pharma type opportunities. So we know that there's still a lot more. You can speak maybe to the balance sheet, but you've improved that tremendously. And I know the organization wants to chase with this platform even more things. So just as we think through, you just looked very strategically well positioned, both standalone, obviously externally as well. And that's why I say there's not a question, it's more of a statement, but I throw it back to you, John, if you want to take that and run with it and think through the different parts. As I'm assuming, again, you are now on folks' radar screen.
Yeah, listen, we're a public company and we have responsibilities to our shareholders, but we're building the next great biotech company and we'll continue to do that. Like you said, we've got all the ingredients. And I would add to the list of capability beyond commercializing that we've been able to show we could file and get approval in 4 major territories in the world in a matter of 4 months. And we've got a discovery engine that shows that you can get approved products, through the regulators and be a commercial success. So you add all that stuff together and, we think, being in the rare disease, and that was a core part of our strategy, is manageable for a company like BioCryst. And then, being able to scale to go after many indications with our Factor D inhibitor is something that we can do as well. And we have the capital to do that. So really exciting time. And our goal is compound value. And we feel like we're well on our way, and we look forward to continuing to show people what we do with the things that we've talked about publicly. And we look forward to sharing more about the things that aren't ready for prime time yet, with more to come.
Good. All right. Well, thanks for the discussion. It's great. And congratulations on all the good work. And we're excited for this year. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Ken.